As we just read and saw today, we are continuing our series on the 10th commandment, or on the 10 commandments. We come to the 10th commandment, the last commandment today, and next week we'll finish up our series just kind of by looking at a summary passage that follows the 10 commandments. And so I've enjoyed the summer being in the 10 commandments and really digging into what the commandments are getting at and what God is trying to teach us through those, more than just a list of things to be obeyed. And so today we come to the idea of do not covet. And so let me ask you a few questions when it comes to coveting. Have you ever been discontented in any way with what you have? Have you ever wished that life was different? Something about your life was different. Have you ever wished that someone else didn't have something because you don't have it and you want it? Have you ever been bitter with God because He chose to bless someone else with something instead of blessing you? You know, all these thoughts that run through our minds and our hearts are signs of coveting. And so if you have ever thought any of those things, you have broken the 10th commandment. You have coveted. Now, all the other commandments we've looked at, the first 9 commandments, are really more outward type commandments. They're things that we could literally see somebody do. So you can see somebody lie, right? You can see somebody steal. You can see somebody not honoring their father and mother. And those are really outward actions, outward commands that God has given in the 10 commandments. But here we come to a commandment that we can't see. I can't look at Chad and say he's coveting right now in his heart, because I can't see his heart. I can't read his mind. I don't know his thoughts. But we can look at our own hearts. And God sees our hearts. And so this command gets at the heart of what all the other commandments are about. And that is that God wants us to know Him and to desire Him. He's concerned with not just what we do, but what we love. What we love in our heart of hearts. What do you love today? What honestly do you love? What is your heart given toward? And so coveting is something that others don't see, but it is definitely there. It is deep in us. And so the 10th commandment calls each of us really to look at our own hearts, to look at our own desires, and to see if there is anything that we desire more than God in our life. Because the emphasis on this command is really about our own contentment and trust. It's about, are we content with what God has given us, with what God has given us in our lives, where we are in our lives, with what we own, with what we have, with the situations that are there right with us right now. Are you content with where God has you? Even if you find yourself in a difficult place right now, difficult time in your marriage, family, work, whatever. Are you content with where God has you? If you're not content, that's a good sign that you might be coveting something else. And so this really gets at the heart of contentment and trust in God. What He sovereignly chooses to give us. And what He doesn't give us. So let's try to kind of dig down and understand, well, what is coveting? What is coveting? How do we really need to define that so we can really look and know, well, this is or is not in my life? And so that's what I want to talk about first. Let's define what coveting is. And to be honest, we know, hey, it is easy to covet, isn't it? And so I think one of the best ways we can really see it is an example. So for those of you who have kids, or you've had kids in the past, or you know little kids, what if you took your kids to a toy store, and kids, you know, what if your parents took you to a toy store, and they just say, hey, you can have all you want in this store. Whatever you want, you can have it. I'm buying it. Unlimited. The blank check. I can write the check for whatever you want. Do you think they would ever come to you and finish and say, enough is enough. I can't take any more. Like, I have enough stuff already. I don't want anything else. Do you think any kid would actually do that until he got literally everything off the toys, off the shelves in that store, right? What about fast forward 25 years and you're about 30, 35 or older, and you put yourself in a mall or a Home Depot or Lowe's or a GameStop if you like to be a gamer, or for me, a bookstore, and you have a unlimited check for any of those stores. Could you ever get to the point where you say, enough is enough, I I could never have this. I don't need this. I have everything I want. Right? The truth is, deep in our hearts, whether we're kids in a toy store or whether we're adults in our favorite store, right, we always want more. Right? There's something that we don't have that we want. There's something that others have that we want. And that's the heart of what coveting is. The Hebrew word for coveting literally is the same word as desire. It means to desire, to long after, to earnestly want something. And there's no difference in those two words. Covet and desire are the same exact word in the Hebrew language, which is what the Bible was originally written in. And so when you think about that, then go back to Genesis 3. In the Garden of Eden, when God creates Adam and Eve, everything's perfect. They're going good. God gives them one instruction: don't eat from this tree, the fruit from this tree, and that's the only thing you shouldn't do. And so then we see sin enter the world. Satan tempts Eve to take this tree that she's not supposed to eat from. Genesis 3:6, let me read that. The woman saw that the tree was good for food and delightful to look at, and that it was desirable for obtaining wisdom. Did you hear that? Desirable for obtaining wisdom. That word desiring for obtaining wisdom means that she is coveting wisdom. She is coveting something she doesn't have or shouldn't have or can't have. And somebody's told her she can't have. And that ultimately is wisdom that Satan has said, you'll have wisdom to be like God through this eating of this fruit. So she's coveting wisdom. And so what does she do? She takes it. She takes from the fruit. She eats it. She gives some to her husband who was with her, and he ate it. And the rest is history. And here we are today with messed up, broken lives because of all going back to that. The sin of coveting. Right? And so coveting means we are desiring something wrongly. We're either desiring it too much or we're desiring something we can't have. So when we desire something too much, how do we measure that? So we can't get out a scale and weigh our desires, right? You can't say, well, this weighs 100 pounds. My desires are 100 pounds. I'm 50 pounds overweight on my desires. No, you can't do that. But we measure it we measure how much we desire things by how much we desire God. Think of a scale, right? Do I desire God? Does it weigh more than what I desire over here? If this weighs more than God, we desire that too much, right? So our desires are disordered towards things. And so another way to think about that is if we desire something that leads you away from God, rather than to be content in God, you're desiring it too much. If your thoughts on this thing, there's no thought of God in that, it's leading you away from God. That's coveting that. We can actually desire things and think of God too, right? We can desire, man, I want this so I can use it for God, right? And so in that sense, our desires aren't outweighing our desire for God. But if it causes us to lose contentment in God in any way, and to put our hopes, our hearts, our love on something else, it is coveting. And the Bible tells us right here, that's sin in our life. You know, the Bible actually tells us that desire in itself is not a bad thing. God created us to have desires. He actually created us to desire Him. Can you imagine a religion where we have no desire at all? That would be horrible, right? Like we're just here going through the motions because we have to be and we don't want to be. That's who wants to do that? No, God created us with an emotion and a love for things, and we should desire and love the right things. And so the Bible actually tells us we should enjoy all good things that God gives us, right? So it's a beautiful day outside, right? So God wants us to enjoy good weather. If God provides us food, He wants us to enjoy the food that we eat. He wants us to enjoy clothing that holds up and lasts, right? These things we recognize, they're all good things from Him. And so take joy in what He gives. And so the world is full of things that are meant to be desired and enjoyed and ultimately bring back worship to God. And so it's right for a man and a woman to desire an intimate relationship in marriage, as we talked about with the commandment about do not commit adultery, right? And it's good to enjoy marriage under God's design. That's a gift. We should desire that. On the other hand, when you think about other religions, think about Buddhism. If you know anything about Buddhism, it actually says we need to eliminate all desire. And just annihilate any desire you have, and the state of non-desire is the best place to be. And so that's why you have Buddhist monks, right, that retreat. They're trying to remove all desires whatsoever and just clear their minds of everything. And Buddhists believe, look, you are saved and you are fully free once you have no desires at all. And that's what they strive for. But the Bible tells us, no, desires can actually be God-given desires. Ultimately, God created us to desire Him. The Bible tells us, look, He made us in His image so that we could know Him and walk with Him and love Him. Love is another word for desire. But the problem is, because of the fall in the Garden of Eden, our desires go astray. We focus our desires on the wrong things in the wrong way. And so the problem, we have to be sure, is not in the fact that we desire wrong things. We desire things too much, and we desire wrong things, things that aren't ours. So we see actually in verse 17 here, there's 4 categories that this commandment lists of things that we should not desire. Right? Let me just list those off. First, we are not to desire our neighbor's spouse. Pretty obvious, right? We're not supposed to desire our neighbor's spouse. We're not supposed to desire our neighbor's servants, our neighbor's animals, which we don't really have ox and donkeys today, right? Or I don't. Maybe some of you do. But we do desire other things that belong to our neighbors, right? As far as cars, like ox and donkeys were means of transportation, means of work, things like that. So we can desire, and think of cars today, right? Transportation. Or the last thing, it just kind of sums it up. It says, do not desire anything that belongs to your neighbor. Right? So why is he saying this? Well, ultimately he's banning a desire that we would want what our neighbor has. And so coveting fails. Ultimately, if we are desiring what our neighbor has, we are failing to consider their best interest and thinking about our interest only. Right? We're putting ourselves above what they have. Because when we say we want what they have, we want to take it. We would just as soon take it for ourselves instead of them having it. And that is not loving them, right? We're jealous of them, and how does that help us interact with them? If we're jealous of our neighbor who has something, then we don't exactly love them well, right? I mean, we usually kind of look at them and it's kind of out of the corner of our eyes, man, you have it easy. It's hard to love you because you have things that I want. And you can't complain because you have it, right? And we think about them in a different, skewed way. And then we also think about wrong ways to get what belongs to our neighbor. Well, what can I do to get that? What can I do to kind of get that from them? And so we violate this commandment when anytime we do not sincerely take pleasure in the joy of other people and the blessings that they have. Right? And when we desire their possessions, their prosperity, their position in life, and we don't take joy in them, we want that for ourselves. And we can't celebrate life with other people that are having some kind of success, because all we can think about is ourselves. The truth is, desires are contagious. If you don't believe me, watch Home and Garden TV. Right? And these people want these new houses and these new decorations, and pretty soon it's easy to start believing, well, I want that too. Man, that looks pretty cool in that house. I think I want my house to look like that. Desires are contagious. And so if someone else wants something, we naturally want it too. Even if we don't care anything about whatever that is, we start wanting it. John Rockefeller, who was one of the wealthiest men who ever lived in America. Right? He was a billionaire, founded all kinds of businesses, the steel industry and other things. He was once asked, how much money does it take to be happy? And this guy had billions of dollars, right? How much money does it take to be happy? To which he replied, just a little bit more. Just a little bit more. And that's exactly what the problem is. A little bit more is never enough. There's always got to be more. So we covet. We desire. We want that. We want it. Even if anything we don't have, we want. And so we see, this is what coveting is. Disordered desires where we love something too much or we love something wrongly. So how can you and I know if that's us today? How can I know if I'm coveting in my heart right now? Well, one way to know you are coveting is if you are living beyond your means. Right? How much money do you actually have and how much are you spending? How much money do you have built up on your credit card? That might be a sign. If those aren't necessities that you have to live, you might be coveting certain things that you can't afford. All right? How much money do you spend in relationship to your income? Do you live beyond your means? Are you just throwing money here and there because you want it, and I got to have it at this moment, and you completely lose track of how much you owe people, right? Our desires are driving our spending, more so than our faithfulness or our stewardship to God, or just being wise with our money. All right, so that's a sign that we might be coveting. Another way is just loving money and wanting more money and loving things and wanting more things too much. Luke 12, verse 15, Jesus says this, "Be aware of all covetousness." So he's bringing us back to the commandment, right? Be aware of that covetousness. And then here's what he relates it to. "For a man's life does not consist in the abundance of his possessions." So Jesus directly ties coveting to the abundance of what we have, whether it's money or possessions or anything else. I think this is, aside from the fact that giving to God is an act of worship, I think this is one reason why God in the Bible calls us to be generous givers. Because if we give and release our money to God and don't spend it on ourselves and own desires, that flies in the face of coveting. Like, you can't just willingly give stuff away to God, to ministry, to the church, or whatever, and be coveting that. Right? It's a physical act of not coveting. And that's what giving generously, it draws our hearts towards God, because we're loving Him more than things in that moment when we give. And so we realize, look, we remember what God has given to us, and we just want to give to Him, and we're not concerned about ourselves. And there's other ways we struggle with coveting that's not related to money. Right? We covet other people's relationships. We covet respect and reputation that other people have that maybe we don't have from other people. We covet this longing to be in a different circumstance or different situation. Man, if my life was like his or like hers, life would be good. My life is messed up. And the truth is, nobody's life is perfect. Right? It just looks good, like Carlos was saying on Facebook or Instagram. It looks good. But I guarantee you, underneath the surface, there's something. There's something. But we still have this coveting. I wish I had what they had. My life was like their life. So this commandment really reminds us, look, God cares about our desires. He cares about our hearts, what we think about, what we love, what we want in life. And so while we can do a really good job of following these other 9 commandments and looking really good to others, man, I'm a good Christian, I'm not committing adultery. I'm not, man, he always tells the truth, or it seems like it. He looks like he honors his parents, he helps them out when they need help, he cares for them if they're sick or whatever. Like, we can put off this really good impression on the other 9 commandments and have people fooled. But the truth is, with this commandment, it hits us hard, right at our pride and what's underneath the surface, because people don't know what's really in our hearts and how we sin and break this commandment so often. That our desires aren't really towards God at all. They're on ourselves and trying to make ourselves look good or whatever. Getting that recognition, that love from other people, because we're keeping the other 9 commandments. And so we know, look, if we are honest, we are all guilty of breaking this commandment. And so that's what coveting is. So we see what coveting is. We're face to face with it now. What's the problem with it? What's the dangers of falling into this? Well, there's 2 big dangers of falling into coveting. First thing is, we don't love God like we should. So we're here today, I assume, to worship God, to learn about God, to hear about God, to tell God we love Him. Coveting directly prevents us from loving God the way we should or want to. We were created to love God, to know Him intimately, to know Him personally, to have Him walking through life with us, right beside us, in us. And we were created to love Him for that. And yet, coveting completely distorts that love for God. Matthew 22, verse 37, Jesus tells us in the greatest commandment, love the Lord your God with all your heart and all your soul and all your mind. Right? That's what He's commanding us to love God. So we were created to love God. We are commanded to love God with everything we have. Everything. Every thought. Every desire. Everything. This is what we are made and called to do. And yet we covet, which means we love something else. We are not loving God with all of everything we are. We're loving something else with part of us. Right? And so at the root of coveting, ultimately, we're not loving God, we're coveting other things because of unbelief in our life. The root cause of coveting coveting does not result because we don't have something. Coveting actually results because we fail to believe something. We are failing to believe that God really is enough. We believe in our heart of hearts we need something else. That God alone is worthy of our lives. No, we're failing that. We're failing to believe that. We're failing, and we want to believe that. Man, we need to love this too to really be happy. We don't just need God. We need something else. And if you find yourself struggling or miserable or hurting and you're a Christian, a lot of times you're just failing to believe that God is enough in that for you. I'm not saying we don't hurt, we don't struggle, but we can pull through that knowing that God is enough. Like, I don't need to change my situation to really be content or happy. God can meet me right where I am. A way that unbelief shows up in our lives is when we try to comfort ourselves when things aren't that great. Have you all ever tried, if your life is, you're just going through a rough patch, and you comfort yourself and you say, well, at least my life isn't as bad as so-and-so. Things could be a lot worse than they are right now because I could be in that situation. I could be over in California where they're having all these wildfires and my house just burned down. All right? And that could be me. And sometimes we comfort ourselves into that type of thinking, but the problem with that is the Bible never tells us to find joy in comparing ourselves to someone else and how bad they are or how bad our situation could be. The Bible actually commands us to find joy in every situation, in that situation we are in, to be content, knowing that all circumstances come from God's hand. Not that we're in a better place than somebody else, because what happens when we are that somebody else? When it's our house that's burning down, and we want to be like the people who still have a house, then where's our contentment then? No, our contentment is in God, in no matter what circumstances we find ourselves in, even the worst. And Paul is a great example of this. Philippians 4, he is in prison, he's been beaten, he's been run out of town, and from prison he writes, I've learned to be content in all circumstances. I've learned to be content in all. And this is what the Bible calls us to do. To not be comparing ourselves and coveting something else. To find hope and joy in the love of God for us and the fact that He is with us. We're content. So coveting keeps us from contentment in God and what He chooses to give us and what He chooses not to give us. And it keeps us from loving Him like we should. So that's the first danger. The second danger is we don't love people like we should. And this follows the first commandment, right? If we're not loving God, we are not going to love people like we should. And Jesus follows that first great commandment in Matthew 22, and he says this. And the second greatest commandment is this, is like it. Love your neighbor as yourself. That's all He says to do. Love your God with everything you are and love your neighbor as yourself. But when we don't love God, our desires get twisted on other things, and we start seeing our neighbors differently. And messes up how we relate to other people. Instead of loving people, we covet their stuff. And instead of desiring our neighbor's goods, instead of desiring our neighbor's good, we start desiring their goods for ourselves. Right? And so as Christians, the ultimate way we know we are called to love our neighbors is to show them, teach them, tell them about Jesus. Because we know, yes, there are physical needs that we are called to love our neighbors in. We're collecting backpack supplies for school right now. Right? We're trying to love our neighbors physically through that. But we know the deepest, greatest way you can love anybody is through a spiritual love. Right? Through showing, hey, Jesus is enough for where you are in your life. And He will walk through this with you. He will give you the strength you need. And there will be joy and contentment in that. And we're called to love our neighbors by showing them and telling them the gospel. The good news of who Jesus is that meets them where they are in their brokenness. And so we talk about this all the time. We want to be out in the community, making disciples of Jesus, loving people, serving them through mercy ministries, through other ministries. Helping them know, hey, Jesus can forgive whatever you've done. Right? No matter how messed up your life is, Jesus came to die for that and to forgive you. But when we covet, that messes it all up. It messes everything. We are not going to love Georgetown the way we're called to love Georgetown if we're always thinking about ourselves. We won't. Our desire for our own things changes how we see people. And sometimes we just don't think about people at all. We are so focused on what we want and how our life could be better, that we completely ignore the needs of people around us, completely ignore their need for Jesus. We don't even think about talking to them or loving them in any way. So sometimes it's just, man, these people are completely out of sight, out of mind, because I'm on myself. The other way is we just start looking at them pridefully, judging them, pitying them, comparing ourselves to them, and just being thankful we're not where they are. Right? That's exactly what the Pharisees did in Jesus' day in Luke 18. God, I thank you that I am not a sinner like this tax collector. Right? And so, is that loving your neighbor? No. You know, we do the same thing when we're thinking about ourselves and how much better off we are than somebody else. God, I thank you I'm not in that situation. I'm not like them. It's just like the Pharisees. And their religion was false. It was all about themselves. And we miss the point that apart from Christ, look, we are as bad or worse than any of our neighbors in this community. We are dead in our sin apart from Christ. We have no hope. Yet He has chosen to give us hope and new life with Him. We have every reason to love them because God has loved us. And so we need to realize, look, if we have this heart of coveting, it's going to affect, it will affect your Christian life. It will affect how you relate to your families. It will affect to how you relate to your any neighbor, person around you, person in your workplace, whatever. It can go back to your own coveting in your own heart. So we see, look, there are very real dangers with this coveting. A lot of times, I'll be honest, it's not that bad to want this. You know, it's not like I'm like spending all kinds of money trying to get this. I just want it. You know, it's okay. I want this in my heart. And yet we get so fixated on it that we miss God and we blow it off. We blow off this commandment like it's no big deal at all. And the truth is, it is a big deal. It changes how much we really love God and how we love people. All right, so we see, look, this is dangerous. This is dangerous to our spiritual health. So what do? Well, we need to replace those wrong desires, to recognize them, to replace them with the right desires. That's what we need. We need new desires. We need them new. Paul tells Timothy, 1 Timothy 6, godliness with contentment is great gain. Great gain over what? Is a great gain over not being content and not being godly, right? Because we're coveting. There's great gain when we find godliness that leads to contentment. And how do we gain contentment? Contentment is rooted in the right desires in our hearts. And we can't give ourselves new desires. Only God can do that. So, the answer is in Hebrews 13, verses 5 through 6. Let me read that for us. Keep your life free from the love of money, and be content with what you have. For God has said, this is why you can be content. This is how you can keep your life free from money. For God has said, I will never fail you, nor forsake you. I will never fail you or forsake you. Money will fail you. Things will fail you. I will never fail you or forsake you. I will always be with you. Therefore, we can boldly say, the Lord is my helper. I will not be afraid. What can man do to me? Right? So contentment comes when we see our wrong desires and how they will always fail us. And we're reminded to look to the God whose presence never leaves us when we know Him. That His presence is with us and it changes our lives. It changes our desires. It gives us the new desires that replace the old. So when you focus on things around you, your vision of God is dimmed. And those things become bigger, God becomes smaller, and you never are content. But when you focus on God, and your vision of God becomes bigger, those other things become smaller. And you have more contentment in God. So what are you focusing on? Are you focusing on the God who did these things for you, who will never leave you? Never fail you? Is He big in your life? Or are things big and God is small? John Piper put it like this, that God is most glorified in us when we are most satisfied in Him. Are you satisfied in God? If you're not satisfied in Him, you're not going to be glorifying Him like the way He wants you to. You know, Christian monks, there's Buddhist monks, like I said earlier. There's also Christian monks who tried to replace wrong desires by isolating themselves, by trying to avoid these desires. Basically, they remove themselves from the world so that they wouldn't be tempted with wrong desires. The problem was, changing the physical location didn't change their heart. You can desire things from a distance rather than just being there, right? Just changing a location doesn't change our hearts. We have a heart problem. All of us. The monks did too. And the only way your desires change is when you become satisfied in God, because the gospel has gripped your heart. And God's love has overwhelmed you, and you want more of it. You want more of it. That the good news of who Jesus is and what he's done is overwhelming to you. So I ask you today, do you know that good news? The good news of Jesus that he wants you and I to know starts with the fact that this law, the 10 Commandments, was given to us so that we might see that we need God. And some of you already know that, man, I know my life is messed up. Like, it is just far from God. But others of us, we forget that very easily. Like, we think our life is good, we got things figured out, we're good enough. How many times do you hear somebody say, well, you get to heaven by being a good person, or by being a good enough friend, or a good enough family member? I love people the best I can, right? The truth is, the 10 Commandments, we break all of these. Even if we think we're good people, we break the commandments. And so the point of this is, look, this is who you really are. You may think of yourself this way, but who you really are is somebody whose sin is separating you from God. Is keeping you from God and his power and his presence in your life. And you have wrong desires that you can't fix on your own. You can never be good enough. And so we see Paul himself in Romans 7. He was the best Pharisee, the best Jew you could be. He was the leader of the Jewish people. He was keeping all the rules perfectly. And then he says in Romans 7, this 10th commandment, the coveting, is what led Paul to know his own sin. To show himself, God showed Paul through the 10th commandment that, man, even though he was the greatest missionary ever, and he was the greatest Jew before he became a Christian, that he still coveted. He still had sin that kept him from God, that needed forgiveness. He needed new desires. And so the good news is, look, these 10 commandments, it starts with the fact that we need to see our brokenness from God, our separation from God, and run to him. The 10 commandments yell at us, run to God. Run to him. Because you can't do it on your own. So that's the first thing we see about the good news. And then the better news is that, okay, we have help in running to God. God sends Jesus to us to bring us to him. It's not just on us trying to get there on our own. He sends Jesus to us to bring us to God. The cross is about the fact that he pays the penalty for us. That he pays the price that everything we've ever done deserves. The judgment we deserve from God. Because the truth is, one thing that we do in disobeying God deserves his punishment. Just like kids that disobey, we have to punish them, right? To teach them consequences. Our punishment for God is eternal judgment, eternal hell, eternal separation from God. And yet Jesus comes, the good news is Jesus comes and he pays that price for your judgment, taking all the judgment of God on himself for everybody who trusts in him. And that changes your heart. That changes your desires. I want to love him more than these other things because of what he's done. That he would take that for me. That's the extent of Jesus' love. The Bible said that even though he was in the very nature of God, he was God himself. He humbled himself to nothing, to the point of a cross. Jesus did that for you. The truth is, Jesus had a right to more riches, to more blessings, to more praise, to more influence than any other person that ever lived. And he was content with none of it. He joyfully laid all those things at the Father's feet and said, I don't need that. I am content with whatever you have called me to do, and you've called me to lay down my life for people, and I will do that. He was content with nothing. Jesus never coveted. Jesus never coveted. He was always content with God's will, even when it meant he had nowhere to lay his head at night. And he loved God, and he loved us perfectly. Even in the garden, the night of Jesus' arrest, he is praying to the Father in agony. Father, I'm horrified of what's about to happen. I'm going to be arrested and crucified and beaten and go through all this stuff. And what is he doing? He's praying, Father, take this cup from me. But then he adds on, but not what I will, but what you will. Right? He's literally laying down any type of comfort, any type of way to get out of what he's facing at the feet of Jesus. God, wherever you want me, I will be. I will be content in that, even being beaten and arrested and dying. So Jesus placed all his desires under God's plan. So how do we overcome wrong desires in us? We let Jesus come in our lives and give us his desires. All right? If Jesus desired God perfectly, the only way we can desire God perfectly is to have him in us. For our lives to be so wrapped up in Christ and the gospel that we want exactly what Jesus wants. And the love of Christ, Paul says, controls us. It compels us, including our desires. It changes us to want more of God and less of things. So today, maybe you realize, man, my life is all about covetousness. I want what other people want so bad. And I've completely missed God in the process. Like, God just isn't in the picture. And my whole life, I've loved myself more than I've loved God or needed him. Maybe you realize that you don't even know this God, but you know you need him. And today, God is offering himself to you. That's why Jesus came. If Jesus came and lived a perfect life and died on a cross, and you didn't need him, that was human torture, right? There's no point in that. But if he died and came and lived a perfect life and died on a cross because we needed God's forgiveness and he offered it to us, that is ultimate love. And he's offering that to you. He's offering to take your sin on himself and pay your price so that you can know God, so that you can have new life and have new desires and be changed. And so Jesus can forgive your sin, whatever you've done. And so what do you need to do? You simply need to see your need for this Jesus and to run to him, to put your faith fully in him, to accept his forgiveness, confess your sin, and follow him. Make your life about him. Say, Jesus, I want my life to be about you because I know I can't do it on my own anymore. I'm following you. Others of you in this room, you love Jesus, but your love has started to fade and you've started loving other things more. You realize, I've lost my first love. So just like the church in Revelation, they lost their first love. The things of this world have gotten a hold of your heart. Well, that doesn't have to be the end. You can remind yourself, look today, gaze on Christ, gaze on the gospel and his love for you. And start running to him again. And let him change your desires back to him, and you'll find the contentment you've been lacking. To be truthful, though, it also could require a radical action in your life. Like if you're spending more than you're making, it may mean you have to cancel your credit cards and just pay cash for everything. Just ask Dave Ramsey about that, right? Or it may mean you have to move to a smaller house, or get an internet filter, or remove the internet altogether from your phone or your computer or whatever else you have. Right? It could require radical action on your part, but again, physically changing your situation doesn't mean it's going to change your heart. You have to replace those desires with Christ in his great love. Set your sights, set your hearts on Jesus, and he's going to overcome the power of covetousness in your life. It's going to take time. As you grow in your love for him, your love for other things will lessen, and you will find hope and contentment in Jesus. Let's pray. God, we thank you for this commandment. We thank you that you love us enough to care about what we desire, even what's in our hearts. That you have a great and perfect will for us, that we would know you, and as we know you, we would love you. Because you are lovable. You are the most loving thing that ever existed. And we can love you and know you and find hope and help and love and joy and peace and all those things in your presence. And you care enough about our desires to show us that. God, show us where we've gone astray, where we haven't loved you, where we've loved and coveted and desired wrong things or other things too much. Help us to put all our hope on Christ today. In Jesus' name, amen.